Well, it's been a long break and pretty nice, enjoyable. Played a lot of Minecraft. I rediscovered that as something that's fun. So today, to start back up, what I wanted to go over is I recently published my friend Rita from here at work. You might remember her. She's been. Let me clean this. You don't want to look at dog hair. See, there's all this stuff you got to do to make sure your stuff is working correctly. All right, there we go. So she suggested that I look at this this O'Reilly report, a recent Cloud O'Reilly report, which was actually pretty nice. It had I think I mentioned this in some previous episode, but I wrote a blog post about it, which was published over the break, and I thought I would just kind of use that as content to go over. Then there's 3 links that I read recently I thought I would just mention for your link satisfaction. I'm not going to go over them in detail, just some sort of main points, and then it's something you can refer back to if you want. So let's go over to the screen here. Now, here is my write-up of the survey, which I'll put here in the chat window if you want to follow along at home. And of course, if you're watching the recording, you can click on it down below to read about it. So I think, any cloud survey you do nowadays, you're going to find that people use a lot of cloud stuff and they're excited about it. There's I don't know, a lot of interest in it. And, this is almost like a problem with doing surveys about cloud usage is it's kind of rare to find very few, very interesting new insights. It's kind of the same thing over and over again, right? People are they want to use cloud. They've got concerns about security, so forth and so on. So, it's a little like self-serving, working for VMware, a vendor that supports on-premise, public cloud, private cloud, all of your multi-cloud stuff. But I think one of the first things that you see when you look through this survey, well, first of all, as I was saying, everyone's using cloud, which at this point for a survey is not very interesting, right? It'd be like, surveying types of food that people like, and everyone enjoys water and lemonade. Still a classic beverage. But there's a couple of interesting, usually you don't see, let me zoom in on this. You don't see a lot of demographic slicing in surveys, especially, free surveys that you have. And so that's why there's 2 charts that I think are worth highlighting quite a bit, which I realize you can't read them perfectly. What's the word people use when they're giving a presentation? This chart's a bit of an eyesore or something. I forget what they say. But let's take a look at these 2 charts. And because what's interesting here is, one, you've got it by public cloud, I think, vendor. And you can see, excuse me, where is the purple and the red? I should probably look that up. We didn't put the legend in there, but electronic Oracle Cloud. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Anyways, what you can see here is maybe that's growth versus not growth. Purple's an odd choice for a chart. Like, what does purple mean? It means something in American politics, but that's probably about it. So you can see broken out by public cloud, and then also interestingly by industry, right? Government, of course, being an industry, like the percentage of people who are using each of these, right? Now, Amazon's the market leader, as it were, so it's not a big surprise that they would have a huge share of things. It's fun to look at the outliers, I think. One, it's interesting that retail is here, because early on when you were selling cloud stuff, one of the things you would sell is like, why would you run your retail operation with your biggest competitor, Amazon? But it looks like people do that. And then telecommunications, that's sort of interesting. And then media and entertainment. Now, this is another area where Amazon competes with their Amazon Prime stuff. But it could also be that in this case, as in I'm sure many other cases, it's just like it works well and people know it, so you use it, right? And there's not enough conflict that it matters. Then you go down to Azure, right, which is ranked more or less as the number 2. And so at this point, like again, it's interesting to see what the differences are. Like what does Microsoft lead in? And the one that stands out the most is government. Now, I guess there's consulting here, but like 2% is to me meaningless in a survey like this. Like whatever. Now, also, I mean, let me astound you with my math skills. 7%, that could be something. That could be around 10%, or it could be 5%, which is more or less nothing, right? So I wouldn't think too much about it. But if you are going to think about something because you need something to talk about, it is fun to think about. Well, maybe it's interesting to ponder that maybe Microsoft has more trust and relationships with governments, and I think this is global, so it's not only U.S. government. And I think also I forget, like, there's that whole Jedi Cloud stuff, people suing each other over winning a deal instead of whatever else. And so I don't know if that includes like, big Department of Defense spending and things like that. I don't know. But it is something interesting to ponder, like what's going on in the government sector there. And then, of course, there's Google Cloud down here. Now, third place of the public cloud market. There are many people listed below who would love to have third place. But it's an ongoing sort of curiosity of the Google Cloud of like, it seems like their technologies, I mean, I think the technologies from all of these companies are more or less on par. Like, they're not exactly like, I mean, I actually have no idea if they're pretty much the same, but I would assume so. And, Google has a lot of machine learning and AI stuff. And, of course, they sort of, with Kubernetes, they sort of won the infrastructure standardization sort of layer, right? I guess now we're all going to be kind of working on the developer layer and development tools. We'll see how that works out. But that seems to be finally once again open up as an area that we can focus on improving instead of kind of battling it out at the infrastructure area for what users of public cloud want to do, what vendors who work in that space, what public cloud providers, right? We've spent a lot of the past 5 years or so on infrastructure, which is valuable to standardize on. But anyways, so Google's got all this interesting tech and sort of brand, and it's like an ongoing thing year over year. Like, what will it take for them to overtake Microsoft or to kind of go to the top, right? Or is that this kind of third place ranking good for them? I don't know. Like, I'm not an analyst anymore, so I don't think too deeply about these things. But it'd be interesting to hear what the deal there is. Or what the thinking is. Now, of course, you can compare to, I don't think, at least in these respondents, and I won't go over the demographics, but I remember looking over them, and they're fine, right? Like, there's nothing too weird going on in the demographics. But, if you compare them to Azure instead of AWS, I mean, there's pretty much trail behind everything there. Now, this is not, I mean, you can imply like market share and things like that, but this is just people saying that they use these various types of cloud. And let me make a note here, because Matt Assay also wrote about this, and I think he had an interesting comment here. Still early, so rankings matter, but could change. So I'll make a note of that when we get back to it. You can hear my son entertaining my daughter back there. So now similar is if you look at, and this, as you'll know, is the core thing that I am always interested in. And that is, man, it would be great to see year over year stuff for this. I wonder, maybe I could look up the past things. People should really publish their raw data sets, especially with someone like O'Reilly, where I don't think I don't think this is lead genning for more stuff. I remember the last survey that I worked on here at VMware, I was suggesting we publish the data set, and I think we were almost willing to, and I don't know, I think Thanksgiving or Christmas came up and I stopped pushing for it. But, because I guess you would have to go clean up the spreadsheet. I'll have to try harder next time I'm asked to work on a spreadsheet. I mean, you would want to commission that so you didn't have to do that work. But anyways, that would be fun to be able to remix the data, as we used to say back before whatever. But here, what's notable is looking at, so the question here is like type of cloud usage, fantastically including not cloud, traditionally managed on-premise infrastructure, what people say they're using per industry, right? And if you look at this, this is where you have some data, some survey information responses behind a lot of the discussion in the cloud market. So the discussion in the cloud market now, if you listen to if you listen to my own podcast that I do with my friends Brandon and Matt, the Software Defined Talk podcast, is that for the past couple of years, everyone in this space has been talking about multi-cloud and on-premise and off-premise, on-premise and off-premise. I guess just multi-cloud, public cloud stuff, except Amazon, who I think only recently, the products they have done kind of like, whether you want to call it edge or on-premise, that have implemented this function. But I think until maybe even, it's not this year anymore, this past year, they didn't really talk about that. And so, I think what you see here in this survey is that multi-cloud is extremely real, right? And this doesn't even include, well, I guess it actually does include using multiple public clouds, because that's what you can see up here, right? Is that these don't add up to 100, right? Well, definitely if you throw in all this, what do we got? 63 plus 52, that's over 100. Last I checked my math. So 79 plus that, plus, so what is that, 80 plus 30, 110? Yeah, so these are each of the types of multiple options, but you can see that in industries, in the average or whatever, when you aggregate it, they use multiple types of public clouds, right? So they're already using multiple types of public clouds. And then down here, you can see that they use multiple types of compute, let's call it, just general compute, whether it's public cloud or private cloud or traditionally managed on-premise infrastructure. That's quite a mouthful there. But these two charts, in the multi-cloud area, what you can take away is that multi-cloud is very real. Now, the year over year is what would be important, is to see if this bubble, if the purple, which again, it's a weird choice for purple, but whatever. I guess they just ran out of green gradients to have. I like the old black and white days where you would have like the stripes and the herringbone and dots, like the different ways of distinguishing the type of data. That would be fun to use charts like that at some point, but I never have time for that much artistry, artificing, I should say. But you couple this with the previous chart, and you can see that there's lots of multi-cloud usage. And then, as I was trying to get to, it would be great to see the progression of these purple dots, right? Like at what rate is this shrinking, growing, or plateaued, right? And at some point, just based on the history of computing, like, you can pick one thing like mainframes and Windows, or Unix and Windows, or Windows to Linux, or whatever. At some point, you'll find a stability of these dots, and they'll pretty much kind of plateau in growth and kind of just trade back and forth. You'll find what the natural kind of balance is. I mean, you can kind of eyeball it, and you can see the balance now is that, is this the case? Except for in software, right? Or in tech. And these are the ones who usually like lead. It's also weird that you put public cloud there, but who lead using new technologies, right? Because they're always coming up with new things and new technologies. Thank you. That there's still over a majority of the people have traditionally managed on-premise infrastructure. Now, if you throw private cloud, which is also here, and again, it's multiple choice, but you can see that a lot of stuff is done on-premise, right? Is not public cloud. Which is an interesting point that we should go visit Matt Assay for, right? So I didn't cover this part, but he wrote up a good piece here. So he also wrote up this survey, and he pointed out another thing that we will look at here. And that is, so there's a lot of respondents who said they're fully cloud native already. And 70% blah, blah, blah. A lot of them are saying like they're gonna get to a high degree of cloud. And then And the figures here, if you dig into them, are a little, I'll go over it, but they take some context. But essentially, if you look at the IT spending forecasts and estimates that IDC has, I shouldn't say forecasts, they're estimates, only 6% of it, of total IT spending globally, is cloud spend. So you've got this mismatch. Maybe the on-premise stuff is insanely expensive, and the public cloud stuff is insanely cheap. But basically what you come to there is, if you compare spending to what people say the percentage of workloads that they're running in cloud, and I don't know if it's, this is public cloud. If we go look at, so this is, let's see, for 2019. So it's a little old, but whatever. It's SaaS, IaaS, and PaaS. And when an analyst uses these terms, they usually only mean public cloud. So basically, he's saying, this is an estimate for the three, well, this is a family-friendly thing, so I won't use my old joke, but the three types, the three as-a-service kind of offerings in public cloud in 2019. I don't know. I want to round that up to 300 billion so that it's like whatever percent. His point is that if you compare like estimates of spending on workloads to people's intentions, stated thing of what they're running in cloud, it doesn't really line up very much, which I think, it's fun to read through this and kind of see what, how that squares up. Because this is a good example of kind of, not skeptically, but like reading into the definitions and the semantics of what a survey says. So here, again, is another thing where he's like, okay, so if we accept that 6 to 10%, he doesn't say that, but I'm going to say 6 to 10% of global IT spend is on cloud. And then does it make sense that many of them that say that they're, following this cloud first way of doing things? And, probably not, right? Like, so again, here's like 30% of people say they're currently cloud native, and 20% more say in 3 or more years. So, you're looking at 40 or 50% of people. And this survey was done probably 6 months ago. So now we're talking about 2.5 years as a minimum. So whatever. So what I read into that is like, I think the survey is fine, right? But people are overly optimistic about what their usage is and how fast they'll be able to actually change over to cloud first, right? So they're estimating a lot of workloads that they'll be moving there, which we'll get to one of the 3 links is a presentation from my old friend John Willis, and he's got, kind of a good way of interrogating this optimism throughout an organization that we'll get to as well. But that gets to the next point that I wanted to cover is, similarly, there's a lot of optimism around modernizing their applications. Oh, but before I get to that, the one thing that I think is worth considering when we kind of look at what Matt is saying here is that I think, you got to do, this is where back when I was doing spreadsheet work doing corporate strategy and things, I would probably spend half a day getting to these numbers, kind of, if I had the raw data, sorting through them and thinking through them, and also going to get a snack here and there, get a cup of coffee. It takes a lot of time to do just a little bit of work in life. And that is, so this is total cloud spending on everything, right? And again, from 2019, but whatever, you shouldn't really get that hung up on these things. So again, this is all of platform as a service, which is always relatively small. Infrastructure as a service, pretty big. And the biggest one, software as a service. So I don't know if you use ADP, that might be in there, or Concur, or if you use, Google Apps or more new things. But this is a huge market, and that's big. This is a lot of money right here. And if you look at the division, I guess we could. Let's click on it and see, do they have oh yeah, there we go. So you can see that SaaS is, actual applications is like the bulk. Do they have a table illustrating that? Look at that. You can see market share. I don't know. But you can see that SaaS is the bulk of the spend here, right? And then this is actually bigger than I would think it would be on PaaS. Things have been looking up in that area. I wonder if they put container as a service in there. Oh, look, there's Larry. I used to know him back when I was an analyst. Super fun. He's done all right for himself there. So, I think when a lot of people are asked about cloud native, my theory would be that they're thinking more about their own applications and kind of custom IT. Now, I don't know if it's really specified there, but I would be careful in assuming that what people are answering about matches perfectly to applications and SaaS stuff, right? Like you've got to kind of like moderate in your head that when some people are answering this, they're thinking more from a developer standpoint. They're not necessarily thinking about, their ERP applications and all of those other types of things. Now, if you kind of have those numbers and doubled them, I don't know, maybe they start to get a little more interesting. But again, the important thing is when you're looking through a survey to think through these kind of things, and don't do that annoying thing where you're trying to invalidate the whole thing. Kind of, I always think of this as a ad hominem attack, right? And you see this a lot in, in all sorts of discourse. That's why going back to the ancient Greeks, it is identified as one of the bad rhetorical moves. But you can also see this in like when you're analyzing a survey, right? If you find one flaw, you can't assume that the whole thing is invalid, right? You can't just be suspicious of the whole thing because there's one thing to quibble about. You just have it shaded. But the shading being that I would suspect that when people are answering about where's his thing? If they're going cloud native or cloud first, it's probably a little bit muddled about what exact workloads they're talking about. And what new technology or business initiative, like, I don't know, it more or less matches up. I should stop repeating myself. And again, also if you use a CNCF definition of cloud native, right, it's build, so you're building your own applications, right? So it's mostly people who write their own custom apps that I would consider to be talking here. Who knows? All right. So let me put a link to this because I think Matt's piece is well worth reading, and it'll be in the links down below if you want to look at. I'm always jealous of Matt. He does pretty good. I don't know if he comes up with the ideas or if people pitch it to him, but he's pretty good at finding surveys like this and other kind of like single point ideas to write something about. Let's see how long a Matt essay column is. I'm going to guess this is 800 words. Let's see. Let me switch over to this. I want to just open up drafts here. And all right, I'll switch back over here. Who knows what's in drafts? How many words is this? 931 words, and that's if we cut out some of the info world prattle here. Let me slim this down. Yeah, it's about 900 words. If you take out and then if you take out some of the other junk. So that's a good piece. 900 words. It's actually really hard to write like a 900 word piece on stuff like this, just as I've demonstrated. It's hard for me because I want to cover too much context and nuance. That's nice. How often does he write? Let's investigate this. I used to have a great column job like this on the Register, where I think every month I would write one. Is Amazon Alexa. So we got January 3rd, December 20th, December 13th. So I'm guessing 2 a month? December. Whoa. Is he writing every week? I already looked at that one. So what do we have here? 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's look at a November 8th and then go back. November 3rd. So October. Okay, so I think he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is December, right? So what is he doing here? October 8th. That's 1, 2, 3. Look at that. He's writing a piece a week. And you can see a lot of what he does is not so bad. You do pretty good just to like see what he wrote about and write your own piece. That would be nice. Totally cheating. Anyways, so the other thing that I wanted to go, speaking of being optimistic, is people's ideas about modernizing. And I think here, like I have a similar take that Matt does, right? And so here's the highlight. If you look at the survey, there's about half of the people are saying they're going to migrate 50% of their applications in the coming year. And again, I forget exactly when this survey was done. I think I could look, but why? Maybe in the summer, let's say the early summer. So reduce that by 6 months. So within 6 months from now, January 4th, 50% of their applications are going to be in the cloud. Now, again, I think what they mean here, or mostly what they mean, is applications they have built and run themselves. So if we go with that cloud native thing, I'd be a little loose on that here, though. And then 20% of them say 100% of their applications will be there. Now, this is, I would say for the most part, entirely unrealistic and even kind of damaging for people to sign up and to expect this kind of thing. It takes many, many years to migrate 50% of your applications, right? Let alone 100% of your applications. I mean, there are people who can do it pretty quickly, but you've got to think about the schedule of things, right? As I kind of go into here, right? Like, and, you know, as with a lot of programming, you know, everything in programming takes about 15 minutes. That's pretty much what it takes. But what people don't account for is the 20 minutes it takes to set up your sort of build environment. The 5 minutes it takes to realize that you typed something wrong in your configuration and have to do it again. The 10 minutes it takes to schedule a meeting, the hour that you have to be in a meeting. You also have to go to your dentist appointment and pick up your kids from school. Then you're going to have, like, you know, it's annual, health insurance selection. So you got to do that. You got an all hands meeting. There's going to be a barbecue that you got to go to for team building. Also Thanksgiving and spring break comes around. Like, you got to load a whole bunch of stuff in there. Plus there's debugging things in production, designing and scheduling things. And then what you throw into here are a few other complicated things that if you're moving to a cloud native setup, you have to learn a different way of project managing your software, a different way of operating and instrumenting your software to make it manageable in public cloud. You're probably going to have to like rewrite some things. Maybe you're lucky enough you can just replatform them. And then you've got to you're probably also going to learn new ways of developing. And if you're lucky, you're going to sort of learn new processes that you're following so that you do things in a more product-driven way rather than just sort of projects that you're delivering. And all the while, you might have different organization structures, new people that you're learning with. So you get the idea. You're learning a different new way of working. And there's all sorts of just like ancillary stuff to do, you know, in addition to that 15 minutes to write some modifications to your code. And I don't know, I think I'm only being about 30% facetious about this. There's a lot of things there. So instead, what I've seen over the years and what we do in VMware Tanzu land is there's a very deliberate, kind of planned out way of retraining by actually doing something, but doing it in a very planned out and very slow way at first, seemingly slow. What's the word for this? Slow and steady, right? And that is, generally what we try to do is like within 6 weeks, you'll do an analysis. I always even forgot that part. You got to do the analysis of applications that you're going to move or modernize. But the method that we follow in Tanzu Labs, we try to use a pretty lightweight analysis to pick some initial applications to work on, right? You may not in detail categorize every single app in your portfolio, which is another flaw in thinking you're going to get to like 50% or even 100% of your workloads modernized in a year or two. Is that assumes that you have done an analysis of every application and you're not wrong about that analysis, right? Which would take a long time to do. However, what you can do is you can do a pretty quick a quick analysis of what you have and pick some easy, valuable applications out, right? Another part of the methodology we have. And you can start to learn what it takes to modernize an application, what it takes to change the way your organization works. Learn all of those things except that 15 minutes of recoding, which you're also going to have to learn what you do in that 15 minutes of coding. That's a new code to have in there as well, but it is only 15 minutes. So, but if you choose a few things initially, right, and you set yourself a modest goal of like, let's just modernize this one thing. Like there's a one example that a famous example from Tanzu land is T-Mobile modernized a just a single call, a single API call. I think it was something like to check minutes usage. It was something I'm getting it totally wrong, but is a single call like that was called a lot, that was critical for the business, and they modernized that service, and they learned a tremendous amount about how to do it, dependencies that they had, and you kind of roll that learning into the next two projects, the next four projects that you do, right? So you kind of slowly build up this change, and you're learning and getting feedback about what it takes to do it. And at some point, maybe after a year, you can start to make an estimate about for the rest of your portfolio how long it will take to move that over, right? And then another thing is you've got to scale this change out to the rest of your organization, right? You can have initial successes with some teams, but if you're assuming you're going to move 100% of your workloads to a different type of running, to a different type of cloud thing, you're also assuming that all of your staff are suddenly going to switch over to that kind of all at once and not really learn from each other. Anyways, so be a little more wiser than the aggregate of these survey respondents about planning out and how long it's going to take to modernize your applications. And don't set yourself up for disappointment. However, maybe in a couple of years, I'll revisit the survey again and see that I was just completely bonkers about what was going on there. So I think those are the main highlights for that piece that I wanted to go over. I think it's for as much like close reading and little poking at it, it's a good survey. There's a lot of good stuff. I mean, in particular, as I was going over this, I was thinking like these two things on multi-cloud are definitely very useful slides at the moment. In fact, I could probably just do one of my corny little 1-minute videos about those. That would be fun. That's a good. Let me write that down. I want to do some more of these videos that I do in the field. Tanzu Talk field video topic ideas. Let's see. Multi-cloud is real. Use the 2 bubble chart. You can't see me typing this, so I know it's the link for you. Bubble chart pictures from the ORI Cloud Survey to show that people actually do use multi-cloud. Also pair with some VMware stuff and CTA talking with us for multi-cloud management stuff. All right, let me just put that there. I'll show you if you're really interested. Here's what this note looks like. So again, I use Bear, and you can see that. So next time I want to come up with, I call these field videos, those little videos that I do outside my house. But next time I want to think of one to do, I can just look up topic ideas or Tanzu Talk topic ideas, and I can come back and say like, oh, there's one that I wanted to do. That's was it Joss Whedon? I read an interview with him a long time ago, and him and his wife described this as keeping the tanks full, right? Like always have write down ideas that you have. Keep the tanks full. So check out that survey. It's good stuff. I really enjoyed it. All right, well, what I want to go over now are 3 links that I've come across recently. I was yesterday, I spent some time perusing. On Mondays, I have all these to-do lists to like
there was a presentation
go check on a lot of the internal videos and external videos, like all the content that we do. And I thought, what else I should do is I should go catch up on my old friends in the industry. So I went searching for things that John Willis has done recently, Andrew Schaefer. Basically, there's a team that Andrew leads over at Red Hat. I don't know if I'm supposed to mention them since they're a competitor, but they do a lot of interesting stuff. And, they kind of focus a lot on the stuff that I do. And it's fun to go see what they're up to. And I came across, it's a year and a half old now. You can see it's stream back then, but I came across this talk from John Willis, which I thought was great. This is not updating for some moment, but that's fine. They're using Restream, pretty good service. So this is basically, I really recommend looking at this because, let me put this here in the chat. And of course, if you're watching this in YouTube, you can go check it out below. But what he goes over here are, let's see if we can get to it. He has this, let's get this, the visual that he has. Where's his gigantic notebook? So at the last DevOps Days Amsterdam that was in person, I remember we spent an afternoon, I'm sometimes pretty good at this, like cornering someone and forcing them to spend, I don't think I was forcing him, just several hours talking about something, which is nice, catching up with on that. But he was telling me how he had, and this must have been a couple of years ago, 3 years ago even, how he had been using this method of, a CIO or, chief of staff of a CIO. Someone hires him to basically come in and kind of give some advice about switching the organization over to doing DevOps. Now, he's, one of the co-authors of the DevOps Handbook and did a tremendous amount of work in the DevOps space and still does, like Lemonade being popular. And so he was telling me that he'll go in and, talk with the executive, but then he'll use his wily and extremely credible career from mainframes to serverless. I don't know. To kind of go in and talk with the actual staff and the teams. And, after a little while, it takes some wheedling, but he figures out the actual state of things, like how things are running, what technologies are used. And he has an example here. If you go and look at this, you'll see he kind of gets stuck on the idea, not stuck, but it's a great example for the type of transformation work he's talking about, where he talks about CMDBs a lot. CMDB, Configuration Management Database? Yeah, or Change Management Database, whatever. Which is supposed to be the single source of truth that tells you everything that's running, the decisions made. It's kind of like the Bible or whatever of your IT infrastructure. And people will say, like, and he does it in this kind of, oh, John, yeah, we have a CMDB and we use that. And everyone will say they use their CMDB. So as an example of a question that gets to the truth, he'll say, so tell me what happened the last time you had an incident. Like, how did you track down, like, the dependencies and the affected systems that you have? And people say, oh, well, we got this spreadsheet from Janice. And he's like, whoa, you didn't go look at the CMDB for that? And the person will say, oh, no, the CMDB is never updated well enough, so we have to use the spreadsheet. And so it's like a series of these kind of, this kind of cajoling and this kind of doing the Columbo thing, where you can kind of narrow down to what people are actually doing. And that's the point of this kind of, let's go to this other chart. I don't want to go over everything because you should really just watch the talk on its own. But that's the point. Let's put this in, where's theater mode? Of the work that he's doing here. Expose is a bad word, but it's to find out how the organization is actually functioning, so you know where to start. There's an old Mates of States song. I think it's like, tell me what you know, so we know you have anything to start with. Let's see. Mates, I used to listen to them a lot. Tell me what you have. Is that right? Where is it? I've been waiting. No. Let's see. So I know if we have anything to start with. Let's look this phrase up. There you go. Tell me what you have. And that's when I'll know if you have anything to start with. So that's basically the point of, let me put that in the notes here. That's the point of this exercise, is to get a baseline of what's actually happening, so you know how to start transforming and what to do, where problems are. And this is kind of like he said, you do all these interviews, and that's what that big book was, is his gigantic book of doing these interviews and what people have said. And he makes a big point that he doesn't reveal his sources, right? He says someone once, this is from a big bank he worked with, and he said he was offered $10,000 for this notebook, and he just said no, because he didn't, I guess because he has enough money, and he didn't want to divulge the sources that are in there, which is critical, not just because he has enough money. That's kind of a crass thing to say, but it also would just make his work totally ineffective. So he takes all those comments, all the things that he's come together and buckets them into general sorts of things. And these are I think the common buckets that he's found. Now, this is like a year and a half old. It'll be interesting to see if there's new buckets. But this is another great chart, right? Because it has a category of things. And then it has like just a little bit on like what the solution is, right? So this is a whole great book and body of work on its own if you want to look at it. But you should check that presentation out. I think it's, later on in the presentation, let's see if this loads up. He spends some time detailing where there are problems, right? Like people not knowing strategy and the effect that has, like people doing inconsistent things. He spends a lot of time on taxonomies and definitions of things, right? Like when I was going over that O'Reilly survey, I also spent a lot of time covering what cloud spend is and cloud native stuff, right? And similarly, I mean, that's just with a survey, but you can imagine in a complex, big enterprise sorting through all the way they do IT, if people don't have a common vocabulary, a common taxonomy, you waste a lot of time. So anyhow, check that out. Now, the next thing I wanted to go over, just very briefly, is I read this Financial Times story here where doctors say it's basically saying that the Apple Watch hasn't lived up to healthcare worry, to making healthcare better, which there's a couple of points here. One is that, I don't know, the framing here is a little too pessimistic, which I think, I mean, I can be pessimistic. I think is what you would kind of expect from coverage of tech things, because it's really not an interesting story if you're just like, yep, things are going great. Here's 2,000 words on that. Those stories are not too interesting, but it's curious in that it starts off going over the health benefits of Apple Watch, right? And really, I mean, as a whole, I've done a couple of interviews. There's a great one. Let me look this up with JT Perry, who let me look this up just to put a note here. Who, he's one of the people in our Tanzu Value Advisors. It's a group kind of like what it's pretty much what John Willis and Andrew Schaefer does. It's kind of the team we have there. And there's Henri. He's also on that team. So this is a good interview to kind of pair
things
up
that
with that.
I guess you could say.
Let me put that. See also interview with JT Perry. So if you check out that interview, in this interview, he comes from the healthcare industry. And I basically wanted to ask him, like, what's the deal with tech and healthcare, right? Like, what are the problems that it's solving in the industry and the opportunities that it's creating, the new things that are possible? And you'll remember over the past 5 or so years, like there's going to be all this great new changes in healthcare. And I don't know, we lose track of how awesome things can be, right? Like now, I mean, I can go get a prescription refill. Like I can fill out a form online and go pick it up from a prescription ATM thing, which is pretty amazing, right? Like that is a lot better than things used to be. And we kind of like just take that for granted now. But in general, like I guess there's a question, probably studies that like all this tech stuff maybe hasn't improved overall health. I don't know if that's true, but that's the framing the article has. And so the question, especially with Apple Watch, is like, so why hasn't it delivered on this greatness or whatever? So it goes, but the curious way this article is done for that kind of conclusion they get to is they cite 2 examples of great opportunities that people can use to actually improve healthcare, right? So you actually can track and do studies about, I don't know what. So you can have all this raw data and have it direct a lot of what you're doing. Now, this would be great to see in the interview what the lack of innovation here is. But one, this is the first problem that's pointed out, is you have a ton of data that is collected. And then the people who are using it, doctors and healthcare people and researchers, maybe they don't have the tools to do something with that data. So that's an interesting problem that I think you encounter in all industries, right? Like we've always had a lot of data. It's just a matter of knowing what to do with it and having the tools to do something with it. And I could see that as a huge problem in healthcare there. Now, all of that said, then it moves on to, where's the other one? So then we have like two examples of people who did have tools to do something, right? And because they have kind of like this kind of simple, what is it? He said, the heart rate and blood oxygen level, like stuff that this person at least says kind of works there. Then you can start to do a lot of predictions about conditions people will have, and get more data and more information if you have the tools to analyze it to actually improve. I think they call it the patient care provided, right? So that's great. And then this person is like, I do that. And then he's like, but other people don't. So it is possible to set it up to take advantage of this new technology. And then you have another doctor, a psychologist, or clinical psychologist. I guess that's different than a doctor, but someone doing healthcare stuff about sleep monitoring. And they say it's also great, right? That it could actually improve things. So you have this setup where, so the technology is okay, and it actually has some ways of improving things that we've got two cases cited there. But then you get into the crux of the problem. So then you're like, well, but people don't use it. Now the question is why, right? And I think this is probably a huge amount of it, right? Is that it just there hasn't been enough, I guess, business development. Where is this? Yeah. So this is actually, this part gets to a big thing. So when you have a new technology, right, and outside of the software world, we in the software world don't really appreciate this because we're not really like regulated very much. And we're always coming up with new disruptive ways to do things. So we're not trying to improve the existing way of doing things. We're trying to come up with a brand new way of doing something almost brand new. But in something like healthcare in the US, right, you have to go through the FDA, who will approve, and it's important, right? They approve that it's not a bunch of quackery and that it actually works. There's a good history of why the FDA exists with a bunch of like snake oil and quackery and things like that in the, what year is this? Around 100, a little over 100 years ago. So it's nice that they're there. Plus what other agencies you have in other government situations. But apparently it hasn't been approved for these methods of using, and it's just part of the nature of how doctoring is done, that if it's not approved, they don't do it. And then also they're not, I don't know what reimbursed for is, but like also it's maybe not covered in insurance companies. So what's happening there is you have got this, and this drives technologists batty and other people, but you have this thing that probably is a better tool, but it just hasn't been integrated into the industry and the system for using it. And if you listen back to that interview with JT Perry, he goes over this point a lot, is that, for example, with telemedicine, which is just visiting with your doctor on a video conference, which, is perfectly fine for running pretty much every other part of society, but for some reason hadn't been fine for doctors to use. But because you had COVID stuff, people were forced to do things in this new way, even if it hadn't been like fully approved or whatever. It's just like there was no other option. And I think what people found is it was totally fine, right? So they were forced to use it. There was urgency to it. And there's another thing that JT goes over, which is open data and sharing data in a meaningful way. Not only opening up APIs so that you can get patient data, but actually having it follow a standard so it's interoperable, so that you can understand it and you can do something with it. And again, various people in the industry didn't do anything until it was regulated. It was required for them to do it. I think it's called FIRE or something. You have to go listen to it. I'm not an expert. That's why I talk with him. So this is, I would almost think about this in the tech world. We've got this idea, and some other worlds, of business development, which is once the technology comes about, if you want it to live up to this industry-changing potential that it has, you have to do all the work after you've innovated the technology and even sold it to kind of set up the market, to set up healthcare, to set up doctors and regulators to accept this thing and integrate it into that industry, to change or at least become part of the culture and the norms of what's happening there, which I think is a little bit of probably what happens when it comes to the Apple Watch and health. Now, if you listen to people who are like way into this stuff, like someone like a Merlin Mann, you can definitely do a lot of this figuring out and driving stuff on your own. But it is always, I haven't, here in the Netherlands, you don't actually really go to the doctor very much. I know it seems crazy, but they just like, they kind of don't care. It's not a normal thing to just go for an annual checkup. I remember when I moved here, I went to a doctor because I have a prescription that I need to get set up with. And I said like, oh, and also I want to schedule like annual checkups and things like that. And she just kind of looked at me and was like, what are you talking about? And I said, oh, in the States, every year you go and they like weigh you and check your blood pressure and do blood tests. And she just kind of looked at me quizzically and she said, we could do a blood test if you want. But, come to learn, it's just like, I think you go to the dentist more often than the doctor. They really like dentists here, but the doctor, you just don't visit them. So, I haven't seen this in a while, but I always wondered when I would go see doctors in the States, like, in theory, I could show them like the pedometer and my weight information, all sorts of things like this. And they were just never interested in that. They didn't want the data, I guess, because it's not approved. But that's the issue that you have there is you got to worry about. Yep, that's right. That's what I found. And actually it's, I think it's kind of nice because in the States, when I would go see the doctor, basically it would be the same conversation. That I don't know why they would weigh me and take my blood pressure. I guess it's just like a thing to check on. But I think they were just kind of always checking to see if I should be prescribed like cholesterol medicine or if I was in some danger zone. And then, they just tell you to eat more vegetables. What I'm trying to say is they don't really do very much. And then they want to check your blood and they're like, yep, you should be healthier. See you later. See you next year. So it kind of probably makes more sense in aggregate to only go see a doctor when in a reactive way. I don't know. Whereas a dentist, it is good to take care of your teeth, which is something I would like my children to appreciate better. So the next link that I want to go over is, let's see, how long are we going here? I'm trying out this new format we got. Not so bad. So there's this not long. There's a bunch I'm not going to cover here. We'll see. Let's see. Yeah, there's preventive stuff that would be nice too. I always wonder about that stuff, right? Like it's a little too late to catch things sometimes if you wait that long. Like what the doctor said, when you turn 50, you go get tested for something, which it's a long time to wait to see if you've got bad cholesterol or whatever. But again, I don't know. It's just a different way of thinking about stuff. So the next one is cloud stuff is much more interesting, sort of. The next one is like some pondering on OKRs. Now, I made a crack, as it were, in Twitter a while ago that like it seems like, I read all these pieces now that or comments that OKRs are crap and shouldn't be used. Whereas I feel like just 2 years ago, when was that book published? Now, OKRs have been used for a long time, but they weren't sort of in the mainstream of like the tech world until very recently. Yeah, Measure What Matters, published in 2017. So what do we got here? I mean, is it minus 2017? So that's about 5 years. So it's sort of like now that tech industry people, and by this I'm joking, it's like the 0.1% of people who write on Twitter and do all the thought leadering. But, now they tend to say bad things about OKRs and they don't seem to like them. They don't work. And I think, as I was joking, there's like a 2 or 5 year shelf life on any new management by measuring kind of your goals, whatever the metrics are that you're measuring things, which, you just like, you get a new system. And, one of my things back in the Agile days is I would say, I don't know what percentage, but I would say a large amount of the initial success you have with adopting Agile and probably adopting cloud native is that you actually end up learning a new system and following a new system, whereas previously you weren't really doing anything, or you weren't following the system that you had very rigorously, right? You had kind of slouched into not doing much work. And yeah, that was the penguin thing. It's look, there's that little penguin. It's for this book. This is the was it John Doerr? Like this, I think this is the book that kind of like launched the tech world caring about OKRs in aggregate. There's always lots of people who cared about OKRs in the tech world, but it kind of has spread it out to airport business book level potential. So it seems like, you got 2 to 5 years before we had to come up with a new way of doing measuring. And often you have that initial success, as I was saying, because you probably weren't too rigorous in following whatever process that you had, which is why you come up with a new one, because you need to kind of renew this focus. It's kind of a cynical way of putting it. Anyways, this is the time of year where we come up with OKRs and goals. So I was interested to read this piece here. Good old Get Your OKRs Out of My Gyms by Kathy Keating. Now, it took me a little while to figure out, because it's probably early in the morning before I had enough coffee. But I think it's worth reading through this because what she goes over, and this is a lot like when every time I learn more and more about Kubernetes, I realize how little it actually does that I assumed that it did, which was just fine, right? It's just the little atomic units. And I had kind of assumed that OKRs would do this kind of thing. And you also see this in other types of corporate goals where, and I think they do this more or less, but let me just generalize to setting a corporate goal, right? And what she suggests is that, and this is a good example to illustrate here, because it's pretty, this is a goal that we have, right? And this goal is just like, all corporate goals are the same. We want more revenue, we want to retain customers that we have, and we want to grow the revenue from our existing customers. So we want new customers, we want existing customers to leave less, and we want to get more revenue from the existing customers that we have. And then 3, we want to reduce costs so that we increase profit. Now, when you're an initial startup and company, you have the third one, the fourth or third one isn't always as important, because also what you're focusing on is driving up the valuation of your company. So you're willing to invest, which is to say lose money on achieving growth, whatever. So here's a good goal. We want to increase we want to sell more stuff. Now, this is kind of like what you would see in kind of an OKR thing, right? Like, what are the measurable things that we want to get to? And also MBOs and stuff. And how, let's measure that. And that's kind of what we have there. Now, and again, all these kind of things, not again, but it kind of short changes this kind of discussion. But what she adds, I think, is what an engineer or kind of an operations focused person would really like, is like, well, let's also discuss like how we're going to do that, right? Like, let's come up with a list of things we're going to do, and also have a date of when we're going to launch that stuff, right? And the other part that's important about this is not that you come up with these things, this full list on its own, but that you very frequently come back and revisit what these goals are and what the experiments that you're running are, right? And the dates that you want to do them. And I think there's an assumption that you're doing this with any sort of corporate goal stuff, right? But I think having it spelled out like this is well worth doing, right? And a big point that she makes is it's really good to have a date around something, right? Not just the end of a quarter or end of a year, but have like a launch date that you're going to do something, and then gather information about how did that affect our goal, and be very focused on this feedback loop and experimenting and coming up with new ideas. And I would suggest also that as you get this feedback, it's probably a good idea to kind of revisit your expectations here, right? Like, I always think it's funny when I see like goals like this, like, we need 2 enterprise customer signups for our product every quarter. Well, I mean, like, what if that's just not possible, right? Like, what if your product is in the wrong market and like you're just not doing the right thing? And what if this and what if that, right? So it's hard to like set expectations like that. If you don't know if it's even possible, which is where you want this feedback loop going into here. So anyhow, if you're doing your, I've given kind of short shrift to this idea. You can read some more detail there. And, you can look up and compare and contrast them to OKRs and stuff like that. But I think this is a good framework to kind of start with. Think about how when you're coming up with your goals and the priorities and your plans for this next coming year, whether it's calendar or fiscal, you can start to kind of figure out, like, how do I put in place this experiment loop, right? And let's kind of nail down what we're going to actually try to do. Maybe not too far ahead, but just kind of throw up some ideas of what it is and then pick some of those to start working on. And then as we get feedback and we run through that experiment, the small batch loop that I'm always talking about, let's bubble that up here and see how that affects the goals that we have. You're learning, right? Instead of just working towards a goal, you're learning what's possible and what you should be doing. So there you go. There's your 3 links and your Tanzu Talk for today. If you're interested in the archives, as always, you can just go to, as you saw perhaps earlier, you can go to tanzutalk.com. We have our podcast here, a great podcast you can subscribe to. But you can also click up here to videos, and you can see the playlist of all past content coming up on, like, I don't know, at some point 2 years or something of things. But you can see what's there. So that's it for today. And with that, we'll see everyone next time.